Okay, Dan. So here's a question I want to ask you first, and welcome to the first episode of the podcast. So, like humanity, like awesome. Everyone that I've talked to over the past year or so who's trying to bring AI into their go-to-market strategy, their messaging, whatever, right? Everyone, when I ask them like, "How did you learn it?" Not one person has said, "Well, I started at the like topmost level, strategy-wise, and I studied that, and then I selectively moved down incrementally into more tactical." No, every one of them says, "Oh, I was trying to solve a particular problem, or I was trying to see if something was possible, and I started and solved that problem, and then sort of moved out from there." Did that happen to you? And if so, what was the problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I would say that my observations are very similar to you, Dean, in the sense that as you think about AI applied to go to market, we're typically seeing it done what I describe as at the edge of our GTM tech stacks. And rather than thinking about solving these really large, hairy problems, individuals are very much focused on how do we automate more of a maybe like a manual task, like an SDR outreach. Um, and so your observation matches exactly what I've seen as well.
And what problem were you trying to solve?
In terms of our business and
Yeah,
AlignICP,
or
we're
just you personally?
well,
You
so
started somewhere.
yeah, and so right now with AI and GTM, I would say we're using it. Gosh, it's becoming a huge important part of our business, and the way that we're applying it is around this idea of creating what I've described as more of a brand narrative, which is kind of the anchor for all of our messaging and positioning. And so, as we continue to work with clients, we continue to learn more about this space. We update our brand narrative, and then that information gets fed into the memory that we have within. We're big users of Claude, and then that information is used to help us improve our messaging and our positioning. So that's a big focus right now for us.
Okay. Now, pretend that I'm a CEO
Hmm.
and I know a lot about my own business and I know a lot about my industry, and I don't know anything about AI agents. And explain to me in terms I'm going to understand without like the inside baseball kind of jargon
Hmm.
what an agent is and does and where does it even live.
Yeah, I would personally think of an agent as a a software application that is helping a member of your go-to-market team take a topic that tends to, or when I say topic, meaning a task that tends to be very laborious and time-consuming, and the agent will make that process more efficient in the sense that it will automate some of that laborious work, um, so that the members on our team can be much more productive in terms of focusing on what I describe as more of tuning things versus starting from a blank piece of paper. And so the way in which I view AI at this point is it's more of a efficiency productivity tool to help really smart people be even more productive than they already are today.
Okay. So I've seen a lot of AI GTM kind of projects started. I've seen a much smaller number of them completed and a chunk of them fail. Why do you think so many of them fail?
My perspective on the topic, Dean, is that when we start these AI projects within the GTM space, we start with the assumption that the current workflow is correct in the first place.
Mm.
And what I think,
uh, I don't mean to interrupt you, but uh, there's an investing book, like sort of like a consumer faith that came out a long time ago, like 30, 40 years ago, and there's a chapter on understanding risk, and what you just said reminded me of that. It says if you don't know what kind of person you are, investing in the stock market is an expensive way to learn. All right. And I used to say the same thing when I worked at a company called Kronos. I was a project manager there, payroll and
I know
time
them
clock.
well. Mhm.
I worked there for a while. And one of the things we used to say is like, when we come in and put in your payroll system, like we're going to learn and you're going to have to like show us all of your rules for paying people. If you don't know how you pay everyone, this was an expensive way to figure it out, but it will be figured out. And so it sounds like it's the same thing. If you think your processes are already like ironed out and great, great. If they're not, but you think they are, you're going to hit some like bumps.
That's a perfect metaphor, and I couldn't agree more with you, Dean. Um, this is a topic I'm super passionate about for a lot of different reasons, but I would argue that the way that we've structured our organizations within the go-to-market space has drifted to a point where the organization's design is broken. And so as a result, when we approach AI projects, we tend to automate and scale things that are already foundationally broken. And so that's a big driver of why more AI projects are not successful. I also think there's another piece to this as well, which is software companies are have always been focused on creating software, and along with software, and the beauty of the licensing model is that it's a business that has very high gross margins.
Mm-hmm.
And so software companies are focused on selling software, not necessarily providing consulting services to help people reimagine their workflows. And my observation, having spent the last 20 years working at software companies, is that because of the fact that the gross margin on consulting is much lower than like a 90% gross margin on software, the software vendors intentionally don't try to help out there because they're worried that it's going to lower their company valuations. So I think there's a double-edged sword there.
Actually, that like leads right into my next question, which is, if I'm a CEO and I'm starting to talk to my own people, and maybe I know some people who could have been vendors or could be vendors or other experts, like what are they not likely to tell me?
Well, I would say in general, I think a lot of this goes into their business model, but also their funding strategy. And so, most software companies today are venture backed. And a big part of being a venture backed company is this idea that you're going to, very quickly scale. And that puts a huge amount of pressure on the leaders within the organization to drive growth. And I think that with that pressure of, compounding annual growth rates of 40, 80, 60%, I think there's times in which we lose track of the customer and why our organizations even exist in the first place. And so rather than being an organization that's there to actually serve your customers and make them more successful, what we end up with is focusing on growth at all cost. And because we need to keep our investors happy and make sure that we're meeting all the commitments that we made during that fundraising process. And so obviously there's nuances and variances of the story, but having spent the last 20 years in venture-backed companies and owning the customer base, what I can see time and time again is that the revenue leaders are across the entire organization. They don't have a great way of really understanding what percentage of the customers are happy and getting value. Like there is no metric that that doesn't live necessarily in a dashboard. And I'd say the closer you can get to it is something like NPS, which a lot of people kind of discount to even start with. So this idea of value realization is something that we all talk about, but I promise you that construct is often not showing up in board decks.
Okay, I have a question that I hadn't thought about before, but in your experience, like, or really it might just come down to opinion and not even experience. Should a company have already finished its go-to-market initiative? Let's say it didn't really have like an organized go-to-market initiative with, like messaging set up and like handoffs from marketing to sales to operations to customer success. Should they already have that And obviously, there's no such thing as a manual process at companies at a large scale anymore, right? There's always some automation. But should they have the manual stuff done first and then come back to see where they can implement AI? Or should they start with like AI as part of the mix if they're going to do a go-to-market initiative and finally like formalize their go-to-market plan?
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting question because there's so many different dimensions of the problem statement and how the approach is. And
I
so,
mean, I can foresee it where you're talking to a CEO
Mhm.
and she says, look, like I get that, there's the possible efficiencies and risks as well, but let's focus on the efficiencies. Like possible efficiencies for like introducing AI at certain stages of our go-to-market process, but we don't even know how to do go-to-market yet.
Yeah.
We've never even formally done it, right?
Mhm.
We're out of friends and family stage. We're doing a lot of advertising, right? Our churn's really high because we haven't really like dialed in our ICP yet. And so like, is the AI going to help us speed up getting an A to Z process in place? Or should we do the A to Z first, right? Just
Yeah.
practically tell me what to do so I'm not going to waste a bunch of money and time.
Sure. So I'll just share our experience on the journey. So for us, we were founded in 2022. So before AI, became what it is
Yeah,
today.
you're an ancient company. Yeah.
And so what has happened over the last 6 months is we've completely rewired our entire business. And what we now are much more focused on is creating systems, ones that include feedback loops. And what I can tell you with a huge amount of confidence, Dean, is the productivity improvements have not showed up yet. And if anything, we've become less productive. And so we have engineers who are frustrated because we are asking them to foundationally do things different. And then on the go-to-market side, it's the same ideas where we're building this system and the system has an anchor. And so we're constantly having to go back to that anchor and readjust things. And so there's this promise that AI is going to pay dividends, and I think it will, but I think our expectations should be such that it will be one step backwards before we get to two step forward.
All right. So if I'm generally in a go-to-market initiative, it tends to be the CMO. You could argue it should always be the CEO, but it's either the CMO or the CEO that are the sort of titular head of the initiative, right? What's the first thing you think they should be asking companies that want to help them, or an internal champion that wants to switch to AI go-to-market orchestration instead of just regular go-to-market?
Yeah, and so my first question I'd be asking about is the foundational data sets. And this is an area where I feel like the opportunity to make an incremental gain leveraging AI, it definitely exists, but the upside potential of it is going to be much smaller. And so especially within more of a marketing domain, you're going to see it in things around like messaging, positioning. You're going to see it in things like BDR, SDR outreach. But the big force multipliers that are really going to move your business are not going to be in those domains. The force multipliers are going to come from solid data foundations that largely do not exist today due to the CRM and being I'll call it source of truth for all of your go-to-market data, which most organizations really struggle with today.
Mm, yeah. All right. It's hard enough already to get sales teams to trust the leads that are coming out of marketing. How do you get them to trust AI generated and qualified leads?
Yeah, and so now you're getting really close to our domain.
Hey, it's called the CEO's Guide to Market Friction, and this is definitely a point of friction.
Yeah, no, and so I love this topic. So a couple of different things that we've seen firsthand, and it works. I can say this with a massive amount of confidence. Is So today, if you look at the process that we use to generate leads, um, sales has they typically have very little involvement in that process. And as a result, the marketing team, they'll generate their MQLs, and then they hope that they eventually turn into sales accepted leads or opportunities. And so what we've done with our clients is we've foundationally changed the process where everyone needs to agree on what good looks like before the campaign is run. And what I mean by that is if you want sales or any other organization to get on board with trusting leads, you have to demonstrate to them why these are good leads in the first place. And so the way to do that is to show them the metrics. And the metrics, what I mean by is, hey, these leads have higher win rates, they have larger ASPs, they have shorter velocity. And then once, not only do they convert at a higher rate, but once they do, they're going to stick with us and grow over time. And if you share that information up front and you ask them for buy-in and commitment and you get that documented, and then what happens is there is no subjectivity about what a good lead is or what a bad lead is because everyone is agreed up front. And so that's how we're solving that problem.
Okay. Now, you didn't know this because this is the first episode of this podcast, but this is a jargon-free zone. So ASP.
I'm sorry. Yeah, average.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, and so I get into my.
Yeah, we all do. It's natural. I do too.
Yeah, and so I can give this another shot. So,
what's ASP stand for?
Average selling price.
Okay. Okay. So I'm usually brought in either before a project gets started or when a project runs into trouble.
Okay.
It's usually the second one. And I'm not going to say the typical situation when I'm brought in. I'm going to ask you when someone wants to start this kind of project, should they be starting on something that could be an easy win, or should they start on something that's like a hard pain point?
I would frame that question with what's happening within the business. So if there's a situation where a business is under a tremendous amount of turmoil or they're seeing huge market headwinds, I would be more apt to make an investment in doing something that's going to change the trajectory of the business. If the business is, let's say the company is overperforming in terms of their
sort of chugging along at least.
Yeah. If they're doing well, then there's an existential threat to the business. Then I would start to experiment with kind of low risk and probably low upside types of projects.
And we talked. You'll often hear about CRMs, the quality of data in CRMs, right? There's a level of data quality that's good enough so that sales can do its work, and then talk about the level of data quality needed for AI to do its work.
Yeah, and so having spent 3 years tapping into CRMs and unwinding them, what I can tell you with conviction is that the way that we think about, when I say the way we as an industry and as operators, we aren't thinking about
that's another way for Dan to say, those of us that have to clean up this mess. Go ahead.
We don't think about the data in the CRM correctly today. And to double click into that statement, we tend to reference the CRM as this binary thing. It's good or bad. And the reality, once you do this work, what you'll learn is that there's probably 50 different shades of gray when it comes to data in the CRM. And if you were to continue to dig into that, there's data in the CRM that's actually pristine and incredibly high value. There's other data that's complete garbage. And a lot of it is driven by the individual that is inputting the data and what their role is in relationship with that data. And so if you were to continue to dig into that, what you'll see is that every single company in the world, that has any real size and scale to it, It's using the CRM to do some foundational things that are required to operate a business. And so, for example, the CRM typically is the source of truth for bookings. And it's typically, and so understanding like when a deal is closed won, the actual dollar amount of the contract, the breakout between recurring, non-recurring revenue, the SKUs associated with the subscription, the start, the end date, those things have to be in place in order to pay commissions. Those things have to be in place in order to uh, activate licenses and turn on the entitlements. And those things have to be in place to send a renewal. Those things have to be in place in order to invoice. And there's obviously a lot of different flavors to that, depending on if you're a consumption-based licensing model or more traditional, just annual subscription. But point being is, there is some data in the CRM that's incredibly sound, and if you have the right frameworks, I would argue that there is a path for most companies to do some really interesting things with CRM data. And so it's not this kind of binary, like it's all good or all bad. It really kind of depends on the data sets that we're talking about.
But do you need like cleaner data overall for AI or not?
I would say it really depends on what the jobs to be done are. And so, to give you a real life example, so when you look at go to market today and you look at how do we define our segments today, we typically will just randomly pick some filters. We'll say, oh, it's in this industry or in this revenue band. There's never been any data analysis that tracks like lifetime value, net revenue retention, all of the key metrics that drive a company's valuation. None of that is even being factored today. And so if you were to ask yourself, hey, what if we were to take the bookings data that we have that is in fact reasonably accurate, turn that into a revenue model that's designed for segmentation? I'd argue you can use AI to identify your most profitable customer segments. It doesn't need to be at the same quality that the finance team gives to the board.
Right.
It's
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some really amazing things you can unlock. I think what most organizations are missing is the proper frameworks and taxonomies to even approach the problem in the first place.
All right. All right. We need to wrap up, but I have a two-part question for you. Same question, two parts. What's the most expensive mistake you tend to see companies making as they implement AI for their go-to-market orchestration? And what's the cheap, hey guys, don't sweat this so much mistake that they all tend to make?
So, Dean, I'm seeing more of option number one than I am.
Yeah, I bet.
Two. And so let's talk about two real life examples. So the first one is related to real life examples. So more and more AI is telling us who to target. And what we've seen is organizations rely on that technology and have incorrectly spent a year investing, something like 10% of revenues chasing a segment that will never convert, nor is there any history of them, converting at any kind of a high rate. So we've seen companies lose a year on their go to market, and we've seen entire sales and marketing teams get replaced because of it. The other thing that I think it's a very common thing right now that people don't understand the damage they're doing to their companies and their brands. It's the AI SDRs. And so there's one in particular. There's actually a very well-known company that recently announced that their AI SDR sent like 18,000 emails in a given month. And I look at that as a huge risk to the brand. And I see it as a great way to kind of burn out your market and damage your brand. And those individuals who are celebrating the volume are not realizing the damage that they're doing to their company, future quarters and years. And so, so when I think about like what's a low risk investment, I just get really concerned as we start to automate things like content creation, without a human in the loop, and one that is very, very knowledgeable, because I just see there being, there's this time delay problem that makes the impact hard to really measure and understand. So I think there'll be more harm done than good in the short term.
Celebrating the volume of emails sent as like there's what is that called? It's not Godwin's law. Godwin's law is the one where given enough time, any online discussion eventually starts talking about Hitler, right? Like someone will like accuse someone else of being it's I think it's called Goodhart's law. Do you know about this one?
I do not.
Goodhart's law says that if you have a goal and a metric, eventually people will focus on the metric at the expense of the goal. Nice. And like the classic example is you want to get healthy, so you decide that you're going to track weight, and you can, of course, like take that way too far and become unhealthy. Again, start unhealthy, become healthy, and then become unhealthy by getting your weight too low, right? And so Goodhart's law says that if you have a goal and a way to measure it, you will eventually focus on the measurement instead of the actual goal. And then pretty soon you're focusing and celebrating and obsessing about the wrong thing, and you'll actually like not achieve or like foul the goal. Yeah. So celebrating that, like AI agents are sending bazillions of emails to any B2B company operates in a pretty limited domain, right? Like one of the main differences between, in marketing anyway, between B2C and B2B. In B2C, you have like tons of potential customers, but tons of like competitors. And in B2B, you have far fewer competitors because there are very few customers, relatively speaking, right? I worked for one company. We had 120 potential customers in the world, right? It was just tier one wireless operators. There aren't that many of them, right? And so like you can't like run an ad campaign or a sales initiative that might potentially piss off 10% of them. Mm-hmm. That's tens of millions of dollars in the next decade you're never going to get, because you don't have enough of a market to burn any of it.
Could not agree with you more. And
yeah.
And so, Dean, look, real life prospecting emails that I receive, there's one, and it shows up every maybe few months, a different flavor of the same message, which is, reach your entire TAM in 1 month. And I was so kind of blown away with it. I actually put it on LinkedIn. Like I obviously blurred out the names of the people in the organization, but I mean, that is the last thing I want to do. Like when I want to, who's feeling the pain, where they're on their journey, and then figure out how we help them be more successful solving that problem. And so, this is.
In fairness, from a marketing and messaging point of view, that is a great hook, because it's definitely going to get your attention. Yeah. You should just never, ever, ever try to actually do it. Right? It reminds me of that some lady years and years and years ago had a book, and it was called How to Lose 200 Pounds in a Weekend. And it was about how to leave your husband. Right? Very different. Like one and the other, very different sort of concepts. How to reach your entire TAM in a month is a fantastic hook, but like never try to do that. Ever try to do that. Okay, fair enough. All right. Is there anything that I forgot that I didn't ask you? Anything that like you're like, geez, Dean reminded me of something. I wish he'd said it.
No. I mean, overall, I really enjoyed the discussion.
Otherwise, I'll let you go. And I really appreciate you being here. This is great.
Yeah, no, likewise. Honored to participate.
All right. Dan, before we go, tell people like how to reach you and like where you are.
Sure. The company that we're building is called AlignICP, and we exist to empower go-to-market leaders, primarily CMOs and CROs, help their organizations reach that next level of growth. And we do that by applying some very specific taxonomies to their customer data to really understand who are those customers getting, which customers are getting the most value, and then how do we focus our GTM activities on those customers that will help us grow and scale as fast as possible. And so I reached on LinkedIn. My name is Dan Sperring, and then my email address is just dan@AlignICP.com.
All right. All right. Thanks. I really appreciate this. This is like a great way to kick off. Loved it.
Awesome.
All right. See you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.